So the biggest thing to take from this section, I think at least, is that the self is a dynamic process that involves a conscious subject. And I guess the ability to be conscious of oneself. Um, he then goes over like a Hegelian like dialectic, like infinite, finite, temporal, eternal, freedom, and necessity. These are all going to be talked about later. Um, but what he's saying here is that these things, the fact that we're both infinite and finite, that we have freedom and necessity, does not entail a self yet. This is a structure of a human being. Um, and simply having a structure or like an outline is not yet a self. It's a negative unity. Um, the reason it's going to be a negative unity, as we're going to see later, it's kind of hard to not like skip ahead, is that he believes that the self is not established by itself. The self can relate to itself, but it wasn't established on its own. It was established by something else, right? It relates to something else. When you are in relation to this power that established you, this eternal power, then it's a positive unity, basically. These things will kind of get more clear as we read on too. Like he'll talk about, I mean, part B I think is the hardest to understand. But
So the positive unity comes in gaining the self through like the eternal and the possible and like the other things, but ultimately in transcendence.
I think there's two requirements. One, it has to relate back to itself, so it can't just be like a passive structure. And the other thing is that it has to relate to the power that established it to be a positive unity. If that makes any sense.
No.
Well, those are kind of the two
I'm sure.
requirements. Maybe we could, let's see. What
Yeah, I'm a
other
bit
book?
lost too.
I
Well,
tried to draw a picture to understand, but I like oh, I think a visual would make it clearer.
should I try to bring up MS Paint here? Well, so he establishes the self as like this like cyclical thing. It relates to itself in over, I guess. But it isn't just this definition of relating to itself. It is the lived process of constantly relating to yourself over and over. What does this mean basically? It means kind of like I am not one static entity. I am constantly becoming a new person. I'm constantly when I go out and I meet a new person and we have a talk, like I all of a sudden have a new relationship with myself because they've maybe they pulled a part of me out that I've never thought of before. Maybe um I don't know, they changed me in some way, right? I'm constantly becoming. I'm not yet a at least in this world, I never stop growing. I never stop becoming a self. It is an ongoing process. So it's kind of in contradiction to a lot of I don't know, maybe like a Cartesian idea or like that the mind is this static thing that's separate from everything. Kierkegaard's view of the world is highly relational. Um, so how despair will relate to this is like depending on how I relate to the world and how I relate to myself is going to change like everything about my spirit. If I am only a person in relation to how much money I make, that is not really much of a self, and I'm not becoming myself. So just think of the self. Think Kierkegaard's a very relational thinker. I guess I would say the static self could not be conscious. Yeah, the static self is well. There's a form of despair, the unconscious despair, which is being unaware that you have a self. And a static self would mean that you're unaware that the self kind of is always becoming. So that's kind of like the bare basics of like this paragraph. If
I,
anything, just take that away.
I think he like talks more about it later on, if I remember correctly. Like there was some talk about the whole like you're not doing it, but you did it. Something, but you're constantly like in the past that you did it, but you're not doing it. I don't remember exactly how the wording was, but I think it
I think it
was more
was in
talked
part
about
C,
later.
maybe.
Yeah.
I think I know what you're talking about. Because he talks about how the past, like, is included in this synthesis and is not yet actualized or something. It's. But does this, like. The biggest thing to get is in this first paragraph, he's laying out definitions. So you're not exactly supposed to understand how these definitions relate to each other fully or, like, how they manifest. You're just supposed to kind of get, like, a general idea of, like, the self. It constantly is in relation. And the reason that he talks about, like, he says the self can't be established by itself because the second form of despair relies on it being established by something else. So it's going to relate back to despair. But what is Shahan writing? Would this mean that stacks of objects are conscious because they're... So we make ourselves objects, things. We misunderstand ourselves and fall into despair. I think to answer your question, Shahan, is kind of in part B here, where he says, is despair a merit or deficit? So he talks about how because we are able to despair, this is proof that we are different from every other creature. The fact that we can have like an existential crisis is kind of proof that something is eternal within us. So to not be aware of the self would be to be like unaware that you have any despair within you, that you have any objects are unconscious because they're static things. I don't know how to fully answer that one, but I think again the self is, let's just say the self is a process of becoming. A negative relation is basically an incomplete definition of the self. There is no becoming in this definition. It's just a set of things, infinite, finite, temporal, eternal. The positive unity is when you realize and start becoming.
Wait, can you repeat the part where you talked about, you just said something about the negative unity is, you just said it before, the
It's just
positive
a
unity.
structure. There is no becoming yet. It's just it's like infinite and finite is just terms. There is no becoming. There is no self here.
So I guess to take it more simple, there's no third like part because it says that it's just soul and the body in relation. So there's not the third relation that it needs to be complete.
Yeah, the third relation would be the thing that established it. The thing that set the self in motion. Because I didn't set myself in motion, right? I didn't ask to be born. That's actually one of Kierkegaard's quotes. He's like, I didn't ask to be here. Like, who's the manager that I can speak to? I did not consent. We did not establish ourselves, is kind of the point here as well. Sean. I don't know if that clears up what the self is or the positive and negative unity. Is there
No, it definitely does.
more questions surrounding this part? Because to be honest, this part is the hardest. I would rather just try to power through it really fast. Transparently. So when despair is completely eradicated, it is relating to itself It wants to be itself and is grounded transparently in the power that established it. So this would be the way out of despair. But again, this is more like a thesis of the whole book, right? We don't know why this is the case yet, or really why this is important yet. And I think I said too, I was worried that this would be too much reading, even 20 pages, because he is dense. But I mean, it goes on to say that, like, once on his own, all his own, he might want to despair. So the other thing I guess to keep in mind is the 3 forms of despair. Not knowing you have a self, which is unconscious despair. Not wanting to be yourself, but knowing you have a self, and then wanting to be yourself in despair. So those are kind of 3 forms of despair as well. I don't know, is there any more questions on like this part, basically? Otherwise I'll kind of give summaries of the next few parts. I have more notes on like everything else except this part. Yeah, I think it will definitely get clearer as we go, Shahan. So part B is kind of just clarifying what despair is, whether it's something horrible or something that is good, basically. And he says it's both. It is something that makes us realize the eternal within us, because like no other animal can do this. No other animal can have an existential crisis or wonder eternally about like these higher concepts. So it's kind of like a proof that we have eternity within us. It's also the greatest ruin, as he says. The despair is the imbalance in relation to synthesis. I think, honestly, we should just go right to C, because this is going to make more sense. It says, yet despair is the sickness unto death, in another and still more definite sense. For there is not the remotest possibility of dying of this sickness in a straightforward sense, or the sickness ending in physical death. On the contrary, the torment of despair is precisely the inability to die. So despair, all forms of despair are going to be this inability to get rid of ourselves, the inability to die, to consume ourselves. And this is contrasted to a regular sickness, which is just, the sickness unto death literally means like you get ill and then you die. The sickness unto death, for in this sense, is to, as he says, despair is a sickness unto death. This tormenting contradiction, the sickness in the self, is eternally to die and yet not to die. To die death itself. And then he also compares it to consuming, is incessantly inward gnawing deeper and deeper in impotent self-consumption. So despair is basically when we want to be rid of ourselves, but we can't. And this is like a common thing. So he'll give an example of Caesar. It's like if a person wants to become Caesar and he fails to do so, he despairs over that. Like, why does he want to become Caesar? Because he doesn't want to be himself. If he becomes Caesar, he thinks he successfully got rid of himself, but he hasn't. He just kind of put it on the back burner. If he fails to become Caesar, his despair also deepens because his self is so inadequate it couldn't become Caesar. This is kind of like how he explains despair. Maybe I should slow down a little bit for people to type things as well. Shahan, what are you not getting so far? I'm trying to kind of just go over it and then ask questions after, but
I think it might be a good idea to just go over it and then take questions because
Yeah.
some parts might be cleared up with like the further definitions of or like kinds of despair.
Yeah, I mean, despair for Kierkegaard is going to always be this misrelation of the self, um, and not wanting to be the self that you were meant to be. If I really dream of just like becoming a basketball player and that's all I want to do, I don't want to be anything else. I'm not really honoring myself. I'm actually in some ways like avoiding myself, right? I'm refusing to confront who I really am and replace it with an image that I'm trying to have others see. He's basically calling out the Lara Bessel. I think the money example is the most apt, though, right? It's like, if I am only a person in relation to my money, I'm not really much of a person. There is no self there. My self is dependent on something completely external to me that did not establish me and does not actually bestow any identity. So he's basically calling all representatives. He also goes over the example of a young woman who falls in love and either her partner dies or breaks up, and she falls completely into despair. It's like, well, why does she fall completely into despair? It's because after this partner leaves, she doesn't have a self anymore. Her self was completely dependent on this other person. And he would argue that this despair was there all along. It was just being covered up by this other person. But there is no relation to anything in this world that can, give you a true self, I guess. What is the real self? For Kierkegaard, it's basically the self that God made you to be in the simplest way possible.
And then you want to get rid of it, but you cannot get rid of it.
Right. I mean, he even almost depicts hell later as being nailed to yourself for eternity, pretty much.
Why do we hate this self so much? That's what I don't really understand. Like, why do we want to be rid of it? Like, why is it sickening?
So, it's kind of basically like a dialectic that's required for us to have faith and joy and happiness. He talks about it directly. I'm trying to remember. Basically, he sees God as giving us this existential dimension. In the concept of anxiety, he defines anxiety as freedom's possibility. What this kind of means is like anxiety is related to freedom. When I graduated high school, I have infinite possibilities in front of me. And these infinite possibilities cause anxiety because I don't know what's the right choice, right? But he's saying that we were offered infinite possibility, pretty much. God put the eternal within us. But this infinite possibility has the ability to either lead to faith or to despair. That's just the nature of anxiety and freedom.
So we basically like hate ourselves because in being a self, like inherent to that is the sort of anxiety of like an infinite possibility in our freedom. So it would just be more comfortable to deal with our necessity and like ignore the fact that we're a self.
It will depend on the situation and the type of despair, right? He'll go
Oh
over
yeah,
infinitude's despair, which is the type of person who only lives in the infinite. They're obsessed with ideas and possibilities and abstractions, but they never live in reality. There is no finite thing. They have all these ideas, they never make into actuality, right?
I guess so. If you're moving towards infinite, then you want to get rid of yourself, and if you have the finite, no, if you're fuck, I'm not. Anyways, one of those is that you want to get rid of yourself, and one of those is that you want to be yourself.
Yeah, except I think what he's saying too is you can't. There is no person here that isn't in despair as well. Like there is no way to become a self on your own. He's going to say that like because we weren't established by ourselves, there is nothing we can do basically to get out of despair that is our own fruition. It's going to rely on this power that established us. In like philosophical fragments, he says like a teacher can't tell you how to be yourself. A teacher can teach you many things about life, but there is no way he can restore this misalignment within you. Maybe a good example is like basically a student who doesn't listen to their teacher, right? Let's say their teacher's giving them a valuable lesson. This teacher cannot get through to them like by their own efforts. This person has to be in a condition of faith to be able to learn from them. Basically. I don't know if that makes any sense. Is misalignment causes despair?
Wait, why is the teacher relevant? I know you just explained like the example, that much I understand, but I don't really quite understand how it's connected or relevant.
So, I think it was relating to what was your initial question again? Because I know it's related to that.
Oh, I see. It was in response to mine about like why we even hate ourselves to begin with.
Yeah, and also
Or
like
was
what was after that? It was like how we were talking about the forms of despair and like how like infinitude's despair is being like stuck in the infinite and like whatnot. And like the reason that people are in despair to begin with too is because they didn't establish themselves. Like there is no time, there is nothing that anyone can do, not even a teacher, that can pull you out of this despair because you didn't this person didn't establish you and you didn't establish you. I mean, even if you don't believe in God, right? Like you didn't come from yourself, right? You came from your parents.
Yeah.
And you were shaped by them. That, you know, it was kind of just giving more context of like why despair is the way that it is for Kierkegaard.
That makes sense.
I mean, a lot of this too is just going over like this whole part B is about how despair isn't like a sickness like blindness where it's obvious. People can think that they are completely happy, but he'll say things like, you know, in the middle of the night you might wake up and you just feel that horrible dread and you don't even know where it's coming from. It's kind of similar to how he defines anxiety. Anxiety doesn't have a definite object. It's actually in Inside Out 2, which is funny, they stole Kierkegaard's definition of anxiety. Fear has a direct object, like if I'm being chased by a bear. Anxiety is all about like possibility. There is no direct object. It's just this constant like it's almost invisible in some ways, and despair is like this as well. There, you know, I could be completely in despair and be going out partying and drinking, right? And no one would have any clue. It's still hidden under wraps no matter what people tell you. And usually he says the people who think that they aren't in despair are usually the ones that are deepest in. He's like, at least if you admit it, you're on the path of healing. If you admit that there's parts of you that are messed up, that you're not happy with, that you wish you could do better, then you're on the path of healing. Just saying like, nah, I'm fine. Everything's great. That's basically all of part B. Right?
Yeah.
Let's quickly go over part C quick. Part C was literally like the despair, infinitude's despair, which is being lost in the infinite. Even emotions become abstract. They just become these ideals. Like everything gets lost in abstraction and imagination is infinitude's despair. And the last part I had you guys read was finitude's despair, which is never considering values or anything. This is someone who's completely just a conformist. They follow society's rules. They never stand out. And it's like this person's really hard to spot in despair because usually they're very successful. They do what everyone tells them to do. They follow the beaten path. They seem like this very successful person, but there is no self there because they never consider values. They never consider like what's in the infinite, what's right and wrong, they just go along with the crowd pretty much. Yeah. Fear of man simply not to dare to be itself. So they won't even dare to be themselves in any way. But this was kind of just every part we went over. This is every section, so I think I'll just take questions and we'll try to work our way through it. I have a feeling that this might be too much reading, but we can try. Is there any like big points for any of you that you're like, I have no idea what he's talking about?
No. Not for me, at least. But
Let me search Socrates.
how connected would you say, like, I know we're still on the topic of despair, but how connected would you say anxiety and, like, the concept of anxiety is to this particular work?
Well, this is basically the sequel to the concept of anxiety, which is why I kind of gave a short definition of it. Anxiety has nothing, like despair is going to be linked towards sin. So for Kierkegaard, sin isn't just an action one takes, it's almost like a condition at points. So if I murder someone, it isn't just the action that's bad, it's like I had to be in a really messed up state to do that, right? If someone is perfectly healthy and not in despair, they're never going to murder someone. I think that should be
Yes, sir,
self-evident,
Abraham.
right? So
But wait,
go ahead.
oh, sorry. What I know, like Abraham in Fear and Trembling was in despair, but which despair particularly? Because he was like apt to kill Isaac, but
Well, I think the
and
point
you know,
was more
like,
that he wasn't. The different problems are different ways that Johannes de Silentio would have approached it. Like, what if he agonized the whole way up to the mountain, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, why?
here, let me
What?
mute this
You
one.
want to let you rouge.
Okay. Kierkegaard did not write this book under his own name. He wrote this under a pseudonym that is above him. So
Mhm.
while Fufu, while this is technically under a pseudonym, Kierkegaard in many of his journal notes specifically states that these views are like his Christian views and are actually almost above what he could ever do himself. Does this mean that someone acting in self-defense is not sinning? What do you mean by it? Does this mean if someone is acting in self-defense is not sinning? There's still an action of sin. It's just despair is like the precondition for a sin to be acted out. Say a mom kills a criminal attempt to defend her child. It would still be a sin, but it wouldn't be despair, I don't think. It's kind of like a a lesser of two evils type situation. Christianity is very much like a virtue ethics. That doesn't, like, some people think like, oh, like it's like thou shalt not steal. Well, it's like, what if I'm starving and I'm about to die? It's like you could still do it, but and it would still be a sin, but it would also still be a good thing in some ways, right? You're preserving yourself. But obviously in the Christian worldview, it's like, well, what if you stole that bread, but someone else, like, starved to death because you did that, right? You don't really know the consequences of your actions fully. You can't fully see the butterfly effect. But I still think if we're going the Kierkegaardian view, he still believes in the Christian doctrines, thou shalt not kill. It doesn't exactly specify self-defense. It's kind of a weird topic. I don't know how to exactly address that one.
I think even if it's in self-defense, it still has negative effects on the soul.
Yeah.
So it doesn't
I
it
think it
doesn't
would.
matter whether you are doing it self-defense or not. It still has negative effects on yourself and on the world.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect way to put it. It would probably cast you further into despair. That's quite an intense thing to go through. That's like last resort. That's not something you would ever choose to do. Because he doesn't see sin as like always just like, oh, I am choosing to be bad. It's a condition. It's a sickness of the spirit.
Exactly. I think I agree.
Trying to see what other people are typing. Yeah, Christianity isn't consequentialist. That's exactly. It's a virtue ethics. It's not utilitarian. It's not hedonistic. It's about character and virtue. Cultivating good traits. Cultivating love of your neighbor. Stuff like that. Which are, like, very non-specific. The idea is more if you follow in the footsteps of this, then you will live a better life. You will have the fortitude and wisdom to make the correct decisions. Or, as Aristotle, the character.
I don't know if it's in this book, but I would like to know if Kierkegaard believes that it's possible for someone to overcome sin and to stop sinning and to overcome despair.
Not on their own. He thinks it requires a proper relationship towards others and towards God, basically. There is nothing that you can do to be saved, is the idea.
But it's possible. I mean, you can be free from despair.
You'd have to constantly annihilate it, like he says. He says despair, like getting rid of it isn't a one-time event. It would be a constant maintenance, because the world, you're always being confronted with new situations. You're always being beaten down in different ways. The self is always becoming. So you'd have to constantly annihilate it, basically.
Okay. Like weeding out,
Yeah, it's a
taking
maintenance.
care of a garden and weeding out the weeds.
Yeah, I mean, like, so the beginning of the book was about how the self is a process. We're always becoming. So there isn't like one point where it's like, despair is gone forever in my life, you know? And it's really hard to know too, because a lot of this he thinks is unconscious, which I think is backed up by modern day psychology now as well. We're kind of unknown to ourselves in a lot of ways. I mean, if we knew ourselves, we wouldn't ever need to improve, really. I always tell myself I'm going to go to the gym, right? But I don't go. Is that because I don't know that the gym is good or bad for me? It's like, no, there's some sort of misalignment with either my habits or my schedule, or I'm in an improper relationship to working out. There's something that is improper there that's preventing me. And this is how he sees like human beings. We all have a special relation to the world.
Hello?
What was that?
Ça va.
Oh.
Ça va s'arrêter.
People
But you're-
speaking. So this is why, like, the reason that he gives God as a solution is because if we put ourself into anything else, it eventually fades away. So if I put myself into, again, money, well, I can't take money with me after I die. I can't guarantee that the money is going to stay, right? What happens if the market crashes? What happens if anything happens? I can't put myself in, a potential future girlfriend because they're going to die someday and I'm going to die someday. He's trying to find something eternal to stake ourself in, which is why he posits that God is the only way out of despair, because it's the only thing that won't ever go away. Even if I write books, right? Let's say I become a famous author. I might exist for hundreds of years, but eventually that will fade too. He's very against this aesthetic worldview that is just like purely finite.
Why specifically the Christian God? What is it that makes so much sense to him that makes him go for the Christian God?
Because Christianity is the, at least I would argue, especially since I've studied other religions, that is, you're saved by faith rather than works. So if we look at a religion like Buddhism or like Hinduism, there's a karma system. That's based on works. You can almost essentially save yourself by just doing good things. Even, do you know the story of the prodigal son in Christianity? Well, I guess I'll say it for people who don't know. It's a story of a son who basically says to his father, I want your inheritance early and move out. Back then, that basically means like, Dad, I want you dead. And I want to move out and spend all my money on hookers and partying. Which is what he does. He takes his dad's inheritance, he goes out and he spends it all. He then like barely survives for a while. He starts like taking care of pigs basically, and then he starts eating the pig food and he's like, I am miserable. So his only option that he realizes he has is to go back to his father and like basically become a slave. Like he wanted to be an indentured servant. His father, he goes back home, his father comes up to him, and instead of, being upset at him for any of that, he runs up to him, kisses him, and hugs him and says like, Like, I'm so glad you're back. My son was lost and now he is found. Like, he was dead and now he has come back to life. And instead of making him do hard labor to make up for all the money he lost, he throws a feast for him. Buddhism has the exact same story pretty much. But instead of forgiving the son, he puts him in indentured servitude for 7 years. This is a metaphor for what Christianity is about. Christianity is, there is nothing I can do that will save myself. I will always mess up. I will hurt people by just existing. I will make these mistakes. I'm not perfect. And so what Christianity offers is there is no work that you can do that can save yourself. There is no teacher who can teach you the right thing. Like in Gnosticism, the Gnostics believe that having the correct knowledge or wisdom or gnosis will save them. Christianity recognizes the fragility of the human being. This is why we also called to help the poor and stuff. That is what makes Christianity unique, I guess, is this: you're saved by faith alone. You are not saved by works. Which is why I mean, this whole book is basically a by faith alone book. I don't know if that answers your question on why Kierkegaard chooses Christianity, but those are the differences that I notice.
Okay, so I mean, I'm playing the devil's advocate a bit here, but then he's just being lazy in some way. Like, I choose this religion because I don't have to do anything. I just have to believe.
No, this is quite
In
the
the-
opposite. This is one of his biggest criticisms of Christianity, is that a lot of Christians will simply not do anything. Right? They'll be like, God will take care of it. There is a verse in James where it says, faith without works is dead. So it's not that works don't matter. It's actually, if you don't do works and you're not being a good person, that would be proof that you actually don't have faith, right? You would still fail the by faith alone if you don't do works. It's just you're not saved by those works. There's nothing you can do that can save you. But if you're not doing works, that's proof that you don't have faith.
Okay,
Does that make
makes-
sense?
that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, and the reasons, so this is Protestant Christianity. Catholics don't believe in by faith alone. They also believe in by works. Same with Orthodoxy. The reason Protestant Christianity believed in this is because the Catholic Church gave this idea called indulgences, where basically you could pay money to like get your, family member out of hell or something, or it was purgatory. You could pay money and they wouldn't be there as long. This can only come about in a religion where works can save you. So if I work hard enough and make enough money, I can just pay you to go to heaven. Right? So the by faith alone is to protect against things like that, to protect against corruption of that kind, of abusing people's. Yeah, I think you get what I'm saying.
But isn't it a bit counterintuitive? I mean, I get what you say, that works are a proof that your faith is real. But couldn't it suffice to do a interior work of, I don't know, strengthening that faith? I mean, why does it have to show externally if it's something interior?
It technically. I mean, I think even just doing internal work would be works, right? If I'm in despair, I'm going to bring everyone down with me. I might kill someone. I might steal from them. I might cheat on them. If I do... I mean, I really think works can be as simple as, like, telling someone that you love them, right? It can be as simple as that. I don't think it is completely to the external. It's just in Christianity, there is many calls to give to the poor, right? I think there's over like 1,000 references to give to poor people. But I mean, the
Okay,
idea.
so
Go ahead.
now that I think of it, it may even serve a purpose of proving yourself that you have faith. Things like giving alms to the poor.
Yeah, and
I
giving it
do
in a
it to
correct
prove
way
to
too.
myself that I have faith. No.
Yeah, and doing it in a correct way too. Like in Matthew 6, he talks about how you shouldn't boast when you give, right? This would actually be, again, trying to save yourself through works without faith. So if I just, go up and I record every single time I give to the homeless, that wouldn't be. Sure, they're getting money either way. They're being helped either way. But this isn't a works-based religion. It isn't just about outcomes. It's about faith. So my heart has to love this person. I'm not giving because, oh, it's the right thing to do or whatever. I'm giving because I genuinely love this person. Because in Christianity, you're called to love your neighbor as yourself. And that means everyone, right?
Okay. Okay. So actually, love is a manifestation of faith.
Yeah. Love and faith are intertwined. I think it was 1 Corinthians 13, faith, love, and hope. And it says love is the greatest of them all. Because again, Christianity, the central theme rather than, let's say, I don't know, Gnosticism is basically escape into a higher plane. For Christianity, it's love. God is love. Because the commandment, it actually is love your Lord God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. Because God is supposed to be love. And you're supposed to love God's creation, which is everything. I mean, love is the highest virtue of Christianity. Faith and love are, faith working through love, as Paul said. Yeah, exactly. I think it was Paul Tillich, too, who said, like, religion goes astray when they separate faith from love. Which completely makes sense to me, right? If you separate faith from love, then that's when you get, like, the Inquisition, you get the Crusades. You're doing it out of purely faith instead of faith and love.
Then doesn't that go against faith alone? Then it's not faith alone. It's faith with love, or faith with love and hope.
They're just not seen as separate. It's like it would be synonymous.
So true faith is actually love, and love is faith, and faith is hope.
If I say I have faith but abuse a child, do I really have faith, right? I wouldn't say that person has faith. And I definitely would not say that they have love. But if this person, believes in God and they truly treat their child with respect and love, then I would say they have faith.
But they are not, they are not synonymous. So they might be reflections of the same thing, but they are not the same.
Do you want to give maybe more on that? On why you think that?
Because then why do we have different words and different meanings for each of them? If they are the same, then it seems absurd to have three words, three concepts for something that is the same. We should unify everything under a single concept. Shouldn't we?
So a magnet is a negative and positive charge, right?
It's more of a question,
Yeah.
more than a claim. It's a question.
Well, so take a magnet, for example. A magnet is a negative and positive charge, but you would still say the magnet is one thing.
Okay.
It's kind of like the same with faith and love. Like, they are kind of like two poles of the same thing. You can talk about them separately, but I think, especially in practice, they can't be different. You could maybe, I like the quote from Evans where he says, for Kierkegaard, existence is not a concept. Like, in existence, I don't know if you could, for example, if you're a Christian, like, separate faith from love. I don't think, at least in the Christian worldview, that's possible. Especially when you act it out. Because as a Christian, you're doing everything out of faith and love. Your love comes from your faith, and your faith comes from your love of God and of people.
Okay,
They're
that makes sense.
dependent on each other, in existence at least. Maybe not in essence, maybe not in concept, but... Because Kierkegaard is
makes sense.
very, very concerned about existence. He's very resistant towards making everything abstract and conceptual. Because it doesn't exist in reality, right? That's why he criticizes Hegel. He's like, Hegel, you built this amazing philosophical mind palace, and yet you live in a shed. There is no... I mean, Hegel got criticized not just by Kierkegaard. Marx basically said the same thing. Marx tried to make Hegel's dialectical system into something that exists in history.
Okay.
Trying to read what everyone's saying in the chat too.
We are just fighting over.
Yeah, I think we went on a bit of a tangent over there.
I mean, there is a book called The Protestant Work Ethic, which kind of talks about how Protestantism kind of led to capitalism. But Protestantism isn't a unified thing either. Protestants, well, I mean, they did murder each other. Like, the Lutherans and Calvinists, like, drowned the Anabaptists, so...
I guess personally I'm talking about the consumption of things because I'm sorry, but like I have seen Orthodox churches, I have seen Lutheran churches because in Estonia that's the two main things, right? They're completely different. Lutherans are low key. Orthodox is like I was just like blinded by gold.
Blinded by gold.
Yeah, like Orthodox churches are fucking crazy. Like I went to visit a monastery and I was just like, what the fuck? Because I was used to like Lutheran churches which are just like cold and plain.
Oh my gosh. Okay, maybe... I don't know. Before we talk about anything else, what do you think of his definition of despair? This inability to be rid of yourself, this inability to die, to constantly consume yourself, right? When I want to become Caesar, it's me trying my hardest to consume myself, destroy myself, and yet I can't. Do you guys agree with this definition of despair?
I mean, I would think that it makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to really say. I'm right now a bit distracted.
What about someone that decides that he doesn't care whether he becomes Caesar or not?
Well,
Someone who is indifferent towards life in a positive way. Like I'm just going to live and I don't care what happens to me as long as I carry on.
that kind of is what faith would be to him. It's like, I am just going to be me. I'm not going to try to be Caesar. I'm not going to try to force myself to be dependent on anyone, like, anyone's opinion of me or my career or my relationships. It's going to be centered in something eternal.
Okay, so that's the answer. That's his answer to despair?
His answer to despair is faith, to believe in something that's, to only have the self be in relation to something eternal. Like, truly. You can still be in relation to your friends and family, but yourself can't be staked in that. It needs to be in something that lasts, not something that passes away.
What about what they are saying in the chat? What about suicide?
That would be the despair of not wanting to be yourself, trying to be rid of yourself. He literally does call it the suicidal despair. But he says even this form of despair, it's like, at least for a Christian, he's like, it's not the end. Like, you're trying to die so badly. But even death isn't an escape for someone who's truly in despair.
I mean, are you truly getting rid of yourself if you're achieving what you want? So if you want to die and you die, then you literally just become what you want to become. So it means that you didn't get rid of yourself.
I would argue that no one truly wants to just die. They want to not be in the situation that they're in. Usually, I mean, again, it's kind of a touchy subject for me at least, but it usually is to escape, like Kierkegaard says, a misrelation. Like, there's something wrong in life. There's something so wrong in what you're doing that you can't deal with it anymore. I wouldn't say that's a want. I would say that was kind of like an unfortunate circumstance. The self, I don't think any self wants to be in despair. I don't think any self wants, like, do you guys ever wake up in the morning and be like, I want to just feel dread today. I want to just feel anxiety today. You know?
Me. There's such thing called being comfortable in its own shitty life. Like, mental illness, you miss your mental illness.
Yeah, I just want to wake up tomorrow and just feel like shit. Like, I don't think people...
I mean, if you're someone who, like, feels, how to say it, like the relation is your mental illness that makes you yourself, then you would want to be in despair in the sense of mental illness because you don't feel like you're yourself if you don't have it.
But again, we're talking about something temporal, too. The despair is related to the eternal as well. It's this eternal capacity. It's not just like... Maybe I should give... You guys ever heard of the true self, false self distinction? It's part of psychology. So let's say, for example, instead of running this book club today, I decided to go to bed. Would I still be me?
Yes.
If I, instead of being named Cade, was named, I don't know, like Michael, would I still be me?
No.
Really?
Yeah. I guess it depends what your beliefs are, but in a lot of cases, people believe.
If I lost a leg, would I still be me? I would say yes. I mean, even if I grew up in a different family, I would still be Cade. These are all what's called the false self. It's the ego. The ego self, maybe I should say as well. Everything that we call I, or everything that we... Like, even my favorite color. If my favorite color was blue instead of green, I would still be Cade. I would still be me. Because even tomorrow, right, I'm constantly becoming, which means that no matter what happens to me, I'm still me. If we truly accept this definition that we're always becoming, that we're always changing. Unless you just don't believe there's a self then, right?
If you're in a constant process of becoming, then the only selves that are yourself will be the ones that you've gone through and that you will go through, not like any ifs or alternatives. You know what I mean? Like, if you were born in a different family, that's something that never happened to you, so you never became that version of Cade. So that Cade wouldn't have been you.
I mean, I guess this is more the belief in the soul, right? It's like, there is something that is still me when I was a baby and still me at 21. You wouldn't say that I'm not Cade anymore because I grew up. you would still identify me as the same person.
Yeah, I agree, because the hypothetical is still useful, because you could always say that somebody can, you can legally change your name and stuff,
Right. And
and
even
you can
tomorrow,
tell people to try something else. Yeah.
I mean, I would say there's difference between if like the past was changed, so for example, your name was different from birth versus like you changing your name later on. You know what I mean? Like I
yeah,
think
but
if
this would
you
all be ego, basically. This is the ego identity. I think basically what I'm explaining to you doesn't work if you only believe you have an ego, if you don't believe that there is a deeper self, which is again what Kierkegaard's going for. He's not talking about the ego. He's not talking about just everyday conscious experience. He's talking about our disposition to the world, I mean, there's never going to be another Cade, right? Like, there's no one who's ever going to be like me ever again. There's something, and the self isn't static either. It's still becoming, but it's still me. I think too, if you guys are maybe into psychoanalysis a bit, this makes more sense. But
oh, I get what you mean in that sense.
I mean, I don't think this is kind of like what despair is, right? If I am only me in relation to my shoes, well then once my shoes are gone, then I'm no longer me. Kierkegaard would argue that you just did that to avoid despair. You're just not confronting your true self. These things are all ego related. They're all temporal. They're all passing. And if everything is just passing, then there is nothing but despair.
He mentioned anything about different conditions in life, like for example, how life is easier for a wealthy man, or how, if you work in a mine, for example, you are more likely to despair, to want to be someone else and to be somewhere else.
I don't think the minds have anything to do with yourself, though, right? It's like, I think what you could say is that if I leave the mines, I have more room to evaluate myself. How would I answer this?
Well, or maybe, I mean, to put another example, a slave and slave owner. If you're the slave, you're more likely to want to change your situation, right?
I mean, I would argue the master is in just as much despair because he's willing to enslave someone. That's not someone who's mentally sound or spiritually sound, right? Because we're going beyond psychology. I think the master, at least spiritually, is in the same amount of despair. Whether he's physically or psychologically is different. I don't think he's not depressed, probably. Probably feels like he's on top of the world, but spiritually speaking, he's bankrupt.
Okay.
I kind of agree with that, because, like, yeah, there's a difference between doing something and having something be done to you.
Yeah, I mean, the slave is probably not bankrupt morally at all because they don't even have a choice in the matter. I don't know where they would be spiritually. I have no clue. I'd have to get more context, right? I mean, even in the Bible it says, like, blessed are the poor of spirit, and I think it's hard too because
Maybe
he talks
even
about despair being a path to faith, right? If you've been beaten down by life, you realize how bad it can be, and you also you gain an
more
insight.
likely to turn to God.
Well, you have more tools now. It's kind of like a lot of psychologists, they become psychologists because they themselves have been hurt, right? usually you have two options when you have a traumatic thing happen to you. You can either hurt people further, which is what a lot of abusers do. They were abused themselves, or you can use that pain and turn it into something that can help people. Which I think would be faith, right? It's like, I'm not going to let these things beat me down despite the fact that the world has done nothing but show me despair. I'm going to choose to be myself and find meaning in the suffering instead of hiding from myself, becoming an abuser, putting on a mask, becoming something else. I'm going to be myself anyways.
I like that. Okay, I agree. I think.
I think I should say too, Kierkegaard, he's very much about like humanitarian ideas too. A lot of people who are not Christians like him because he attacks the church for its hypocrisy, right? This way of framing despair and faith, I think, sees the human being a lot more fully and is a lot more human. He's resisting objectification of a person and is willing to accept like these things happen. A person doesn't just hurt someone because, oh, they're evil. They might be in despair, right? They might have never had a chance. They might be scared or hiding from themselves. It kind of gives a more human look to people.